By 15 years old, my guest today says she was burnt out from a dysfunctional childhood, but where you begin doesn't necessarily determine where you end up. Rhonda Reyes, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me.
So tell me how at 15 you were feeling so burnt out. What was your childhood like?
My father was an alcoholic and very abusive. There's a lot of fighting and a lot of destruction in the home. And so by the time I was 15, I was just done. I was tired. I ran away from home. I wanted nothing more to do with it. I just couldn't handle that life. And then I ended up moving in with my dad and my stepmom. And my dad had become a Christian before this, and God had just miraculously redeemed my dad. And so I got to learn about God through them and go to church with them, and that's when I came to know the Lord, and He just transformed me.
Tell me about that moment, because you know, as people of faith, we often talk about we came to the Lord and it changed us, but what did that actually feel like for you at 15 when you made that decision to invite Jesus into your life?
I was hanging out with a lot of people from our church, some young people, and they had something that I didn't have. They had a joy, they had a peace, they had happiness that I didn't. I was angry, I was frustrated, I was bitter inside. And when I spent a lot of time with them, and when I finally made that decision and I understood what was offered to me, I knew I needed a change. I knew I couldn't continue on in my life the way I was, and I needed something concrete. And when I accepted Jesus, it just felt like a whole weight lifted off of me, and I felt a freedom that I never knew before. And even a lot of the anger and the bitterness and the frustration was gone.
And so I know, you know, we start that journey giving our lives to God, but we have to keep walking through, and life happens and hard things happen.
Yes,
I know a number of years later you had a marriage that ended. Tell me about that.
There was something that had happened that was very destructive. I found out after that I didn't know had happened with my children, and that was devastating to me. And what happened was the church turned away from me and went with my husband. And so that really destroyed me in regards to trusting people in the church, because they're supposed to be there to help you, but they weren't. And I became very angry. I was very bitter, and I just said, God, I want nothing to do with your people. I love you, I'll serve you, but I'm not going back to church.
I know a lot of people watching this can probably relate, because even though as followers of Jesus we seek to emulate him, we don't always get it right. Sometimes we get it very, very wrong. Sometimes we're not doing a good job at all of being like Christ. So it makes me sad to hear that, because we hope for the best. And you know, I'm so sorry that that hurt you. There came a season in your life where God started to redeem even that pain from the church and started to change your heart. Tell me about that.
Well, I had moved away from where we were living, and I had my 3 young children with me, but God started to speak to my heart, and He knows I'd do anything for my children. Yeah. They're my life, you know, and you always want the best for them. You want them to have better than what you had. And God spoke to me and said, you need to take your children back to church. And I kind of argued with him a little bit and said, God, I really don't want to go back because they destroy you. But he said, you need to take your children back. And I said, okay, Lord. And I had happened to be looking through the newspaper looking for a job, and I saw this little strip for a church. It was called, it's no longer going, but it was called Saskatoon Center for Hope. And I saw that, and so I thought, okay, well, we'll go there. So we went there, and God used that church for 7 years to bring restoration back to my life, to bring me back to Him. And they just loved me as I was and loved me through the pain into wholeness.
Which is a great lesson there, that whatever bad experiences you might have had with Christians, institutions, churches, ministries, doesn't mean they're all like that. It doesn't mean that will always be your experience. And it's so good to see that that was redeemed. Now, you yourself work kind of in a ministry,
Yes.
Fire in the Bush. Tell me a little bit about that.
God gave that to my dad, I think it was in '89. The Lord laid it on his heart to start this ministry. It started out as evangelistical, and then in 2011, God told him to start a church. And at that time, he came to me and asked me if I would come and be his assistant pastor and his worship leader. And so I moved from Saskatchewan out to Alberta. The mandate for Fire in the Bush Ministries is to reach the lost, but also the brokenhearted, the ones that are supposed to be in church but aren't in church because they've been hurt from one thing or another, and they need restoration, and he wants to bring them in and bring restoration to them, and that's our heart. God did that with us, and we want to see them come back in to fulfill the call of God on their lives.
You work with a lot of Indigenous in Canada, Indigenous people, and you know, I think there's a lot that we can learn about the history of what has happened with First Peoples in Canada, some of the pain that they've experienced. What do Canadians need to understand about First Peoples in this country?
We need to love them, first of all. We need to stop judging them and putting them in a box. And we need to be able to see past what we see on the outside and look into the heart and minister to the heart, because that's what God does with us, is he ministers to our heart.
We have a lot of history as people of faith with First Peoples in this country. We have a lot of ground to make up because the church was part of residential schools.
Yes.
We were part of the abuse.
Yes.
How do you, as a person of faith, working with Indigenous people, overcome those kinds of barriers, you know, of our shared history?
I just do my best just to let them know that, hey, what happened is in the past. I'm sorry that happened to you. We want to make it right. Jesus is here to set you free, to bring healing to you, because he loves you just as you are.
It's a beautiful picture. You who have received so much healing in your own life, now sharing it with other people across Canada. That's the best picture of how it should be, as we give away what God has so generously given us. Thanks for all of the great work that you do across Canada.
You're welcome. Thank you.